A big one on one of the most notorious missing person cases in U.S. history. It involves Pedro Hernandez, who was convicted 8 years ago of killing 6-year-old Etan Patz in New York in 1979. Very famous case. Now a federal appeals court has overturned the conviction and called for a new trial.
On the morning of May 25th, 1979, a 6-year-old boy walked out of his family's apartment at 113 Prince Street in Lower Manhattan. He was heading for a school bus stop at the corner of Prince and West Broadway, about a block and a half away. It was the first time his parents had let him make the walk alone. His mother watched from the doorway until he crossed Wooster Street. Etan Patz never reached the bus stop, and he never came home. No one was charged for 33 years. When a man finally was, the case against him had no body, no weapon, no physical evidence at all. It rested on one confession his own lawyers say should never have been believed. Whether that confession is enough to keep him in prison has been fought over ever since. 4 days ago, it reached the Supreme Court. His full name was Etan Patz. He was born on October 9, 1972, and he was growing up in Soho with his parents, Stan and Julie, and his younger brother, Ari. He was 6 years old, sandy-haired, and small for his age. By his mother's account, he was a trusting child who treated everyone he met as a friend. His father was a professional photographer who worked out of the same loft the family lived in on Prince Street. That detail matters more than it sounds, because it meant the Patz family had something almost no other family of a missing child had in 1979. They had a wall of clear, recent professional photographs of their son. May 25th, 1979 was a Friday, the last school day before Memorial Day weekend. Etan had been asking his parents to let him walk to the bus stop on his own. Other kids in the neighborhood did it. The walk was short, straight down Prince Street through a part of Manhattan that was still mostly old manufacturing lofts and loading docks, with artists and young families moving in above the shop floors. Julie agreed that morning. She gave him $1 to buy a soda on the way and walked him to the door. She let him go south toward the corner on his own, and after a moment she went back upstairs. When Etan did not come home that afternoon, Julie called the mother of one of his friends and learned he had never arrived at school. She called the police. By that evening, around 100 officers were searching Soho with bloodhounds. The search spread through Lower Manhattan and down into the subway tunnels. Stan Patz had photographed his son 2 days earlier, a blonde boy in a wide-brimmed hat looking straight at the camera. That image went up on walls and lampposts across the city, and it became one of the most recognized photographs of a missing child in the country. In the first 2 weeks, police logged more than 4,000 hours on the case and interviewed roughly 500 people. Volunteers papered the neighborhood with thousands of posters. Then the emergency phase wound down. The officers who had camped in the Patz apartment answering the phone packed up and left a legal pad beside it, with instructions to write down every call. From then on, the family was alone with the case. Tips kept coming, from across the city and from around the world, with sightings of boys who matched Etan's description. None of them panned out. No witness had ever seen anyone take him. Etan had walked out his front door on a clear Friday morning and vanished inside the space of a single block. Subscribe so you don't miss how this one finally broke. Most missing child cases in 1979 faded from the news within weeks. This one did not, because the Patzes refused to let it. They stayed in the Prince Street apartment for decades and kept the same phone number in case their son ever called. They put his face in front of every reporter and camera they could reach, and they found other families whose children had gone missing and worked alongside them. What grew out of that work reshaped the country. In 1983, President Reagan designated May 25th, the day Etan disappeared, as National Missing Children's Day. Around the same time, Etan's photograph became one of the first to appear on the side of milk cartons, carried to breakfast tables in millions of households. 2 years after Etan vanished, a 6-year-old named Adam Walsh was taken from a Florida shopping mall and killed, and the two cases together pushed the country toward action. In 1984, Congress passed the Missing Children's Assistance Act, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was founded that same year. Through all of it, the Patzes kept the same phone number and a notebook beside the phone, logging every call that came in, no matter how cruel or how strange. A 6-year-old who walked to a bus stop one morning had changed the way an entire country watched its children. None of it brought him home. In 2001, after 22 years, a judge declared Etan legally dead. For 6 years, the case sat with the NYPD, and the file filled up with leads that went nowhere. In 1985, a federal prosecutor named Stuart Grabois was assigned to it and told to do whatever it took. He went back through the file from the beginning and landed on a name that had surfaced before. Jose Antonio Ramos was a convicted child sex offender, and he had a thread connecting him to the Patz family. A woman the Patzes had hired to walk Etan home during a bus strike had been in a relationship with Ramos. That put him on the same streets Etan walked. In 1982, Ramos had been investigated for trying to lure 2 boys toward a drain pipe in the Bronx where he was living, and police found photographs of young blonde boys among his things. Grabois brought him in. He asked Ramos directly how many times he had been with Etan Patz, and according to Grabois, Ramos broke down. He said he was 90% sure that a boy he had taken to his apartment on May 25, 1979, was the same boy he later saw on television. Then he stopped. He said the boy refused him and that he let him go and put him on a subway. He never admitted to killing anyone. Etan had often played in Washington Square Park, a place Ramos was known to frequent. But without a body and without a full confession, Grabois could not charge him. Ramos was later convicted in Pennsylvania of molesting an 8-year-old boy and sentenced to a long term in state prison. Investigators came to believe his reach went far beyond one city. Grabois later described how Ramos had traveled the country in a converted school bus, handing out toys and baseball cards to young boys to draw them in. For the Patz family, Ramos became the answer. Stan Patz said for years that Ramos was the man who had taken his son. The criminal case against Ramos never came, so the family went at him a different way. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit in civil court, where the standard of proof is lower and a defendant can be made to answer questions under oath. Ramos refused to answer. In 2004, a judge ruled in the Patzes' favor and declared Ramos responsible for Etan's death, awarding the family $2 million. They never collected a cent of it. Ramos denied killing Etan for the rest of his life. He served his full Pennsylvania sentence and was released in November 2012. He died at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan in March of this year, at the age of 82, still denying he had anything to do with the boy. For more than 2 decades, Ramos was the name attached to this case. Then the investigation turned, and it turned hard, and it left him behind. By the end, even the Patz family had let the judgment against him go. On May 25, 2010, the 31st anniversary of the disappearance, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. reopened the case. A new team went back through decades of files, re-interviewed old witnesses, and ran down leads that had gone cold in the 1980s. In April 2012, the FBI and the NYPD descended on a basement at 127B Prince Street, half a block from the Patz apartment. It had been the workshop of a handyman named Othniel Miller, who knew the family and had given Etan $1 the day before he disappeared. Miller had poured a fresh concrete floor in that basement shortly after Etan vanished. In an interview, investigators said he had blurted out a question of his own. What if the body was moved? A cadaver dog signaled on the spot. Agents tore up the floor and dug for 5 days while camera crews lined Prince Street. The story was national news all over again. In the end, the dig turned up animal bones and nothing that belonged to Etan. Miller was cleared and never charged, but the dig was not a dead end. It was the thing that broke the case open because of who was watching it on television. A man in New Jersey named Jose Lopez saw the coverage of the basement dig and called police. He told them his brother-in-law might be involved, and he gave them a name detectives had never heard before: Pedro Hernandez. In 1979, Hernandez had been 18 years old, working as a stock clerk at a bodega on the same block where Etan lived and walked to school. He had worked there for about a month before leaving the city that summer and moving back to his mother's home in southern New Jersey. He never returned to Soho. For 33 years, he had lived quietly in the New Jersey suburbs, working low-wage jobs and raising a family, and no one investigating Etan Patz had ever spoken his name. According to relatives, Hernandez had not kept the matter entirely to himself. In the early 1980s, his sister Norma said, she walked into a Camden police station and told them her brother had killed and strangled a little boy in New York. She said she begged them to look into it. By her account, no detective ever called her back, and nothing came of it. Camden police later said they had no record of the report. Around that same period, Hernandez stood in a prayer circle at a Camden church, in front of about 15 people, and said he had strangled a child and thrown the body in the trash. By his own later account of that night, everyone in the circle was confessing something, so he confessed too. The group's leader did not go to the authorities either. For roughly 30 years, those words sat with the people who had heard them. A sister, a prayer circle, an entire church group. Nobody connected any of it to Etan Patz until the detectives came knocking in 2012. On May 23, 2012, detectives drove Hernandez to the Camden County Prosecutor's Office in New Jersey and began to question him. What followed lasted more than 7 hours. At first, he denied knowing anything. Then he started to talk. He said he had lured Etan into the basement of the bodega with the promise of a soda. He said he grabbed the boy by the neck and choked him. Something just took over me, he told them. He said the boy was still alive when he put him in a plastic bag, still moving. He said he placed the bag inside a box, carried it a short distance up the block, and left it on the curb with the trash. The next day, he said, he walked back, and the box was gone. That first confession came before anyone read Hernandez his rights. Only after he had said all of it did detectives turn on a camera, advise him of his rights, and ask him to repeat it. He did. Hours later, he went through it a third time with a prosecutor from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. He had also, over the years, told his wife and his daughter. On May 24, 2012, Police Commissioner Ray Kelly announced that a man was in custody who had implicated himself in the disappearance. Hernandez was charged with murder and kidnapping. Police walked him back through Soho, where he pointed out where he said he had left the box. By his account, garbage collectors had taken it 33 years earlier. There was no box to find, and there never would be. There is a detail about Pedro Hernandez that sat at the center of everything that came after. He had a documented history of mental illness going back decades, with diagnoses of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and an IQ his lawyers described as in the borderline range. He was on antipsychotic medication. He had no criminal record and no history of violence. So this is what the prosecution had, and what it did not have. It had those confessions, detailed and repeated. It had nothing else. No body, no forensic evidence, nothing physical placing him anywhere near Etan on the morning the boy disappeared. The case was the confession, and it would stay that way through everything that followed. Subscribe so you don't miss how a single jury note unraveled all of it. In 2015, prosecutors took that confession into a courtroom. Everything turned on it, and on the people Hernandez had told over the years. His brother-in-law placed him at the bodega, and church members confirmed the prayer circle, but nothing tied him directly to the boy. The defense argued the confession was worthless. Their client had given it after 7 hours of questioning, with no lawyer present and no warning of his rights, and his psychiatric history made him exactly the kind of person who might confess to something he never did. A forensic psychiatrist testified that a person with schizophrenia could come to believe he had done something he had not done and confess to it. The defense also pointed back at Jose Ramos, a man with a documented history of targeting children in that same neighborhood, who knew the boy's route. The first trial lasted 3 months and ended without a verdict. The jury's first vote split 8-4 for conviction. Over 18 days it crept toward guilty, 9-3, then 10-2, then 11-1, and there it stopped. The single holdout was a juror named Adam Siras, who said he could not find enough evidence beyond the confession to convict and could not rule out Jose Ramos. The other 11 could not move him. The judge declared a mistrial. Outside the courthouse, Etan Patz made his frustration plain that day. "This man did it," he told the reporters. "How many times does a man have to confess before you believe him?" Prosecutors brought it back. The second trial reached a jury in early 2017, and on February 14th, after 9 days, the panel convicted Hernandez of felony murder and kidnapping. But they did not convict him of everything. They acquitted him of intentional murder. Under New York law, felony murder can apply when someone dies during another serious crime, like a kidnapping, even without proof that the person meant to kill. Hernandez was sentenced to 25 years to life. The Patzes had waited 38 years for those words. The words held for 8 years. Then they came apart over a single question the jury had written down during those 9 days of deliberation. The jury sent out several notes while they worked. One of them went to the confessions directly. If they decided that the first one, the statement given before Hernandez was read his rights, was not voluntary, did they then have to throw out the videotaped confessions that came after it? The question reached straight into the heart of the case, and it touched something the Supreme Court had addressed in 2004 in a decision called Missouri versus Seibert. That ruling dealt with a police tactic known as question first. Officers question a suspect without reading him his rights, get a statement, then read the rights and have him repeat it on tape. In Seibert, the court said that when officers deliberately use that method, the later confession can be thrown out too, unless specific steps were taken to break the connection between the two. The trial judge, Maxwell Wiley, gave the jurors a 2-word answer. The answer is no, he told them. Nothing more. 2 days later, they convicted. Hernandez's lawyers appealed, and at first they lost at every level. Then they filed a federal petition arguing that the judge's answer to that jury note had violated the Seibert ruling. A district judge denied it, calling the answer technically correct, and any error harmless. The defense appealed again to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. On July 21, 2025, a 3-judge panel ruled, and it ruled unanimously. The instruction the judge had given was, in the court's words, clearly wrong and manifestly prejudicial. The jury, the panel said, should have been told that if they found the first confession was the product of a deliberate question-first strategy, they had the option of throwing out all of the confessions. Instead, they got a flat no, which took that option off the table. The panel went further than the law strictly required, and noted in writing that it had serious doubts about how reliable Hernandez's confessions were in the first place. The court vacated the conviction and ordered a new trial. If the state did not retry Hernandez within a reasonable time, he would walk free. A federal judge later set a hard deadline. Jury selection had to begin by June 1, 2026, or Hernandez would be released. In November 2025, with days left on the clock to decide, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg announced he would try Pedro Hernandez a 3rd time. Bragg called the basis for the reversal a slender reed that ignored a 5-month trial with dozens of witnesses. But the prosecutors did not just prepare for a 3rd trial. They also went looking for a way to make sure it never had to happen. That second route ran straight to Washington. Prosecutors asked the U.S. Supreme Court to step in and restore the 2017 verdict, arguing the appeals court had overstepped. The case carried a new name on the way up: McCarthy versus Hernandez. On June 22, 2026, the court ruled. By a vote of 6-3, it reinstated the conviction. The 3 liberal justices dissented. In an unsigned opinion, the majority held that the Second Circuit had exceeded its authority under a 1996 federal law that sharply limits when federal courts can overturn state convictions. Seibert, the court said, governs whether a confession can be admitted as evidence, not what a judge has to tell a jury during deliberations. We have never applied it in any other context, the majority wrote. There is a line in that opinion that lands hard. The majority did not dispute the appeals panel's misgivings about the confessions. But those misgivings, the court said, were not something a federal habeas court was permitted to act on. The ruling did not decide whether the confession was true. It decided that the federal courts had no authority to ask. The conviction stood. There would be no third trial. Pedro Hernandez, now 64, would continue serving 25 years to life at the Elmira Correctional Facility, with his first parole hearing set for 2037. 47 years after a 6-year-old boy walked out of 113 Prince Street, the legal fight is over, and the question underneath it is not. The Supreme Court's ruling was about power, not proof. It let a state conviction stand while placing the one unanswered question: whether that confession can be trusted, permanently outside any court's reach. That question, the one the first jury argued over for 18 days, does not have an official answer. And now it never will. Adam Sirois, the juror who hung the first trial, spoke up again this week. He pointed out that the first jury deliberated 18 days, and the second deliberated 9, and said that does not happen unless there is a great deal of doubt in the room. He called the decision not to pursue Ramos back in the 1980s a mistake, and said the ruling was not the right closure for New York, and not the right closure for the Patz family either. Bragg said the decision upheld the conviction for a horrific murder that changed a generation of New Yorkers. Hernandez's lawyers said an innocent man is in prison for a crime he did not commit. Both of those statements came out the same afternoon, and nothing in the ruling chooses between them. Stan and Julie Patz sold the Prince Street loft and moved to Hawaii, where Ari lives. Julie testified at the second trial. She identified the photograph Stan had taken of their son 2 days before he disappeared. The photograph that went on the posters. The photograph that went on the milk cartons. The one that made their boy the face of every missing child in America for a generation. Jose Ramos is dead. Pedro Hernandez is in prison, and the bus stop at Prince and West Broadway is still there. About a block and a half from a front door a 6-year-old walked out of on a Friday morning in May and never came back. If this case stayed with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. More solved cases in the playlist.